Well, they say what you don't know won't hurt you, but in the case of air quality in airplane cabins, that may not be the case. Most of us have never heard of fume events, but they may cause the air you breathe on board to become toxic, so toxic, in fact. A former flight attendant is suing an airline manufacturer for allegedly making her sick, and a former pilot has made a documentary called Welcome Aboard Toxic Airlines. Here to tell us more is Jessica Ravitz, who has just posted a story on CNN.com on this very topic. Jessica, thanks very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Very interesting situation of this former airline attendant who has brought a suit against airline manufacturers, claiming she was made sick by this contaminated bleed air. What is bleed air?
Since the early 60s, most passenger jets, actually all passenger jets, have gotten fresh air from the engines. Air is pulled through the engines, compressed and cooled, and then pumped into the cabin. The issue here is that people say if there are leaks in the seals in the engine oil, hydraulic fluid, those types of contaminants can ostensibly get into the air that is then blown into the cabin.
We're talking about the kind of contaminants that have been used in nerve agents and pesticides, I read in your article.
These are tricresyl phosphates. And yes, they've been banned in many places. Pesticides and nerve agents are some of the places where we've seen them.
So the former airline attendant who brought the suit, her name is Terry Williams. What kind of medical complaints did she have?
Well, initially she said she felt like she just had a cold. She was on a flight where she saw an actual smoke or fume event, is what they call it. And she had an itchy throat, a headache, a cough. But then it spiraled downward quickly. Today she deals with a tremor in her arm. She has a consistent migraine headache. She hasn't gone without a headache since December, she says. And she's had vision loss, tingling sensations in her feet, a whole myriad of conditions.
And we know that she was a 17-year veteran of American Airlines. Have you heard any response from the airline industry?
Well, this suit is against the manufacturer. The claim is that they should have had filters and sensors on board to protect people from contaminated air. And I do have a statement from a spokesman, Todd Blecker from Boeing, and he said he was aware of the lawsuit, but he couldn't discuss the details at this time. He then added, regarding the issue that the suit appears to raise, I can say that we believe that the air in the airplane cabins is safe. So Boeing contends that the air is fine.
What about the duration of this alleged problem? You were saying, Jessica, that it's since the 1960s that airline passengers have received air in those two ways, both recirculated in the cabin and also this bleed air through the engine. Right. So if it goes that far back, how come we don't know more about it?
My sources tell me that there were talks about this in the mid-60s, but the first written report that we were able to find came from 1977 involving a 34-year-old military pilot who became incapacitated while flying. Since then, there have been multiple reports by the National Research Council that were actually ordered up by Congress and presented to the Federal Aviation Administration. So it's been ongoing. It's a very difficult issue, very political, a lot of finger pointing, who's to blame. Is it on the FAA, is it on airlines and maintenance, or is it on the manufacturer?
And then how many people are we talking about? You're citing a couple of examples there of people who've got sick, but millions of people fly every year. Many people fly multiple times, so wouldn't we have seen more
It's very confusing. People haven't heard of this issue, for one thing, but also it affects people differently, is what I'm told. Depending on your biology, medications you're on, your enzyme levels, you may or may not be affected by contaminated air. So in the case of this lawsuit, this is the only one I personally know about that was filed regarding this flight. But maybe there are people who are sick who don't know it. That's at least what the lawyers contend.
Well, Jessica, I want to introduce somebody now who does claim that indeed they were sickened by this contaminated air. We want to introduce Tristan Loraine. He's a former pilot who says he was medically retired due to exposure to contaminated plane air. He's made a documentary actually on the issue. It's called Welcome Aboard Toxic Airlines. Tristan, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your experience, because I know that before you got sick, you were a very healthy individual, even participating in Ironman events.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, I was an airline pilot for 20 years, and when I was flying on the Boeing 757 aircraft, we would frequently smell these contaminated air smells, and I would frequently end up using emergency oxygen, and after these repeated exposures, I was subsequently ill health retired. So when I was ill health retired, I thought there was three things that really needed to be done. One, we needed the airline industry to admit the problem. Secondly, we needed to make flying safer. And thirdly, we needed to address this issue about people's human rights being breached by not being told when they're exposed. So we made the documentary, Welcome Aboard Toxic Airlines.
So by watching this documentary, what are you hoping that people will understand?
First of all, as an airline captain, I can clearly tell you that there is no airline in the world that is informing the passengers when they are exposed. So most passengers pay their airline ticket and assume that the air they breathe will be clean. But sometimes this isn't the case, and the airline industry just lets the passengers walk off the airplane. I've seen it happen, and some of these passengers will get sick. So what we're saying is we need to fit detection systems on the airplanes. Most passengers would be shocked to think that these airplanes are flying around with no form of detection system to warn us, the pilots, or even the passengers when the air is contaminated. And let's not forget, a lot of these contaminants are odorless, like carbon monoxide. So when Boeing make the statement that, they believe the air is clean, I don't know how they can do that when they don't actually have any detection systems on the airplane to measure the air.
And we're joined right now, Tristan, by Jessica, who wrote an article on CNN.com about this very issue. She actually was able to get a statement from one of the aircraft manufacturers who is involved in this lawsuit. Wondering about yourself, CNN has not been able to contact the airline industry. Have you yourself pursued this with the airline industry?
When we made the film, we approached the Federal Aviation Administration, and we approached over 50 leading airlines in the world and asked them to come on camera and give an interview. Every one of those failed to do so. And what we have today is the public who are uninformed. So if the public want to become informed and they want to see what symptoms or what it smells like, they should visit the organization that's set up to deal with the public, which is known as the Aerotoxic Association, which they can just go to aerotoxic.org. And there they can get more information to help them become better informed, because they are in the moment being kept in the dark.
Tristan, what is your life like now as a result of this alleged contamination?
Well, it's certainly not alleged, because they found the toxins that are present in the oil in my blood. And I went from doing the Ironman triathlon, being a fairly fit individual, to 6 months later being ill health retired. And today I suffer long-term neurological damage as a result of these exposures. And I also suffer, increased sensitivity to chemical exposures, increased fatigue, etc. So I'm not in a wheelchair for sure, but I certainly am no longer to do the job which I was trained to do and which I loved doing. So we've got to address these issues, and for 40 years the airline industry has known about this, so we really, really need to get this sorted once and for all. And let's really remember that the technology exists today to sort this. What's lacking is the will, and what's also lacking is the governments around the world taking steps. And that's why, by informing the public about these problems by the documentary and by other means, the public will complain and the public will force change.
That brings us actually to what's happening over there in the UK, Tristan. What are you seeing in terms of hearings?
In the United Kingdom, you have the Civil Aviation Authority, which is entirely funded by the airline industry in the United Kingdom, in complete denial with their head in the sand. But politically, when the documentary came out, Welcome Aboard Toxic Airlines, it triggered 2 calls for a public inquiry. That means the opposition political parties have said we need to have a public inquiry to get to the bottom of this. But sadly, to date, the current government, which is currently there but probably won't be much longer, have denied that and have refused that permission for that to happen.
It's actually incredible, Tristan, when you talk about the length of time that the industry has been aware of this issue and the impact that it has had on individuals such as yourself and the airline attendant who we were talking about with Jessica just a little earlier, that there isn't more public awareness about this.
The reason why there's no more public awareness is you've got to remember that there was only a smoking ban on airplanes in the late 80s, early 90s. So up until that time, all these contaminated air smells would have been masked. But since then, if any passenger gets on an airplane now or tomorrow, they should ask themselves, if they smell anything that isn't like being outside in a field, they should say to themselves, what are these chemicals that I'm smelling? Because the airline industry won't tell you. And we know from having done swab tests of the walls of airplanes, it doesn't matter whether it's Airbus or Boeing or Embraer, there is over 90% of these are coming back positive for the neurotoxic chemical tricrystal phosphate. So these exposures are occurring, and obviously there's a lack of awareness because nobody is telling the public.
Well,
and that's why we made the
pilots then, Tristan? Is there a reluctance among pilots, such as yourself, to actually speak out?
Of course, there's a reluctance for pilots to rock the boat. The airline industry, is suffering financially, and anytime somebody picks a hand up in any industry to complain about something, people will be earmarked as troublemakers. But I also co-chair a group that represents 500,000 crews around the world who are speaking out and who are asking for a change. And it's not change which, it's not unreasonable what we're requesting. We're requesting that detection systems are fitted and filters are fitted. But the absolute, complete, long-term solution is the Boeing 787. And Boeing should be applauded for building an airplane that resolves these issues whilst Airbus remain in the dark ages.
And Tristan, we do know in your documentary you did hear from another pilot who was willing to speak out. Let's take a listen to that soundbite if we can.
If you're left with any doubt now about contaminated air, look at me. I used to be an airline pilot. I flew for 20 years and I now no longer fly because of contaminated air. My last employer terminated my position with a letter that stated, we can no longer guarantee you a safe working environment. And that was with reference to the air in the aeroplane. So, hey, a reality check. If it's not safe for me, how can it be safe for you?
And that was a clip from Welcome to Toxic Airlines. Tristan, want to thank you very much for joining us and for sharing the details of your fascinating documentary with us. We wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much, and you'll be interested to know we're turning that into a feature film, a major feature film, like an Aaron Brockovich called Shadows from the Sky, and that'll be coming out hopefully next year.
All right, we will look out for it. Thank you so much, Tristan Loraine.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And we also, of course, want to thank Jessica for bringing this story to our attention. Of course, for people who want to read more, your story is now posted on CNN.com.
Yep, it's online today.
All right,
Thank you.
Fascinating stuff, and something I think many of us were far from aware of.
Yeah, I know, I'd never heard of it.
Me either. All right, thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.